Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you. We want to welcome our friends in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of A Conversation. Well, actually, this is a special edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. I'm pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salaamedia platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salaamedia is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. My guests for today's special broadcast are Brother Inayet Wadee, a well-known and respected program host at the Salaamedia network, and retired attorney and businessman Muhammad Bashir. Our topic of focus for today is the vote in review. As most of the world is well aware, we just had a historic and highly consequential vote here in the United States. It's truly an unprecedented vote that has taken place. This is the second time since it's been about 100 years, maybe about a little more than a century, that a president has returned back to the White House. And in this case, it's a president with all kind of stuff, attached to him, all kinds of controversies attached to him. He is a convicted felon. And you would wonder, how could a convicted felon be allowed to run for the highest political office in the land? But he is not just someone who ran, he is someone who has won, and he won by a very, very, very comfortable margin. I think it's noteworthy to share a note that the Council on American Islamic Relations released in the wake of this precedent-setting election that just took place. The CARE statement reads, a Muslim civil rights and advocacy group commends Muslims for turning out to vote despite deep frustration and disillusionment with both major parties. It goes on to say, in the coming months, and listen to the wording closely. I mean, because the wording of this statement from the largest, civil rights, quote unquote, organization, civil liberties organization, a Muslim civil liberties and civil rights organization in the country, it speaks volume. Just the verbiage itself, it speaks volumes. It goes on to say, in the coming months, American Muslims must mobilize in partnership with communities across America to oppose any attempt to harm vulnerable communities, such as launching a mass deportation of all undocumented families, reinstating the Muslim ban, or weaponizing the Justice Department against activists, including college students speaking out against the Gaza genocide. I think about this type of warning coming from a major Muslim advocacy organization in the United States in the wake of a precedent-setting election where a Republican mired in controversy has returned to the Oval Office, or is in the process in a couple of months, once the vote has been certified, returning to the highest political office in the land that likes to project itself around the world as the land of liberty and justice for all. I mean, think about this type of warning coming from this organization. It says a lot about the atmosphere that we now find ourselves in, this place that we find ourselves in. The Democratic Party lost an election that many thought it should have won, that many thought it would win. But at the same time, there were many who were opposed for different reasons to the Democratic standard bearer winning the election. There were many that were opposed, and for different reasons. From an Islamic or from a Muslim standpoint, there was a lot of division within our Muslim community over this election. There were some that sided with Kamala Harris, the standard bearer. There were others who sided with the Green Party, Dr. Jill Stein and Dr. Butch Ware, her running mate. There were others that sided, believe it or not, with Donald Trump. And there were still others. There was another segment of the Muslim population that just wanted to sit this one out. They didn't want to vote for any of the candidates running for the presidency. I mean, this is how much division there was within the ranks of the Muslims, not to say, the controversies that were raging within, the majority non-Muslim community, but they were raging. As far as our Muslim polity is concerned, the reason why the divisions were so deep and evoked so much pain, so much divisive pain, is because of the genocide that has been ongoing for the past year in Gaza. Now, it's for me, it's been quite interesting to note the genesis of this genocide, how it began. I mean, the seeds of the genocide were planted long before October 6th of last year, long before. And one of the ironies is that the individual who just won the presidency had a significant hand in helping to create the circumstance that opened the way for what apartheid Israel decided to do after Hamas and the other resistance fighters in Gaza did what they decided they needed to do because of the crippling, the suffocating oppressive circumstance that they and their people had been under for so many years in Gaza, a circumstance that was getting worse and worse as the apartheid state of Israel was moving closer and closer to Arab Muslim regimes in the region as part of a normalization process. What happened on October 6th, it was triggered by what had been taking place for many years, and the fact that it was becoming worse and worse and worse. Now, with that being said, to understand why there was such division within the ranks of the Muslims in the United States regarding this election, all we need to see is a piece of video that we're about to see of a former president, William Jefferson Clinton, Bill Clinton, functioning as a surrogate of the candidate that was running for the highest political office in the land, running another historic election. And, subhanAllah, he was her surrogate, speaking to an audience in one of the most Muslim populated parts of the United States of America. In the Detroit area of Michigan, he spoke to an audience that was primarily comprised of Arabs, of different tribes and Muslims. Listen to what Mr. Clinton had to say to this audience in support of Vice President Kamala Harris. Let's see that video, Brother Party.
Let me talk about the hardest issue here in Michigan is the Middle East. And I have to be careful what I say because there's only one president at a time, and none of us can get ahead of where we're going. But I think we're going to have to essentially start again on the peace process. And I understand why young Palestinian and Arab Americans in Michigan think too many people have died. I get that. But if you lived in one of those kibbutzim in Israel, right next to Gaza, where the people there were the most pro-friendship with Palestine, most pro-two-state solution of any of the Israeli communities, were the ones right next to Gaza. And Hamas butchered them. And so then the people who criticize it are essentially saying, yeah, but look how many people you've killed in Ritalin. So how many is enough for you to kill to punish them for the terrible things they did? That all sounds nice until you realize, what would you do if it was your family and you hadn't done anything but support a homeland for the Palestinians, and one day they come for you and slaughter the people in your village? You would say, well, you'll have to forgive me. I'm not keeping score that way. It isn't how many we've had to kill, because Hamas makes sure that they're shielded by civilians. They'll force you to kill civilians if you want to defend yourself.
With a message like that, who needs opposition? It was shocking to me when I listened to what Clinton said to that audience, the message that he delivered. And it came as no surprise that he helped to water the till of support for Donald Trump in that very populous territory of the United States that's one of the most heavily saturated Arab and Muslim parts of the country. With that being said, let's bring our brothers on and begin this conversation with some perspective from each of them. I wanted my brother Inayet to join us today to share with us some perspective on how this election result is playing out in South Africa. You know, South Africa has been a stalwart country in support of justice in this ongoing genocide that has been taking place in occupied Palestine. And it has taken its share of hits in the international community as a result, I should say in parts of the international community. As a result, it has, I would guesstimate from what I've seen, in the vast majority of the rank and file portions of the international community, it has won a tremendous amount of accolades for its principled support of our Palestinian brothers and sisters, and doing what it can to argue for accountability for those who have been engaged in genocide, and also bringing attention to those who have been facilitating genocide. With that said, brother, how has this election been playing out in South Africa, brother Inayet?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you, El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan, and also to my fellow panelist, Muhammad Bashir. Assalamu alaikum to you as well. Jazakallah shukran so much for giving me the opportunity of being on the other side for a change, Al-Hajj, and putting me in the hot seat. But coming to the US elections and looking at it from a South African perspective, now I just want to take a step back, and a research was actually conducted by the Social Research Foundation in South Africa. And this was to gauge South African public opinion on the elections that have just taken place in America on Trump versus Harris. Now, there was one single question that was asked. Are you aware of the upcoming presidential election in the United States of America? If so, who would you vote for in that election? Now, this survey was conducted by race, by education, by income, by party affiliation. And there were certain tentative conclusions that were actually drawn as a result of the survey. And a first insight into the data was that the awareness of the American elections was relatively low in South Africa. And of those South Africans who were aware of the elections, roughly a third of them said they would vote for Trump, and 2/3 said they would vote for Kamala Harris. And this is now another interesting dynamic, where we found that the support for Donald Trump was higher amongst Black South Africans than white South Africans, with just under 40% of Black South Africans aware of the elections. Now, this obviously tells us a fair amount as far as South Africa is concerned and the awareness. And looking at it depends on from which side of the coin you're actually looking at this election. If you're looking at it from an economic perspective, uh, the market analysts will talk about it. They would talk about the currency. They would worry about how a Trump presidency would impact on South Africa from an economic perspective, particularly in light of South Africa being in the spotlight, South Africa taking the case of genocide to the ICJ. How would that impact on South Africa? We know what has happened in the past. There has been threat. There has been certain trade agreements between South Africa and the United States of America that was under threat for a period. But looking at South Africa as a society, South Africa as a community, South Africa is a country that has evolved over a period of time through the ugly face of apartheid, through segregation, through suffering injustices themselves. And I think most South Africans would identify with what South Africa has done, the case to the ICJ, and more South Africans would be concerned about the United States in itself, its complicity, its own human rights record, and more importantly, its support in each and every way to the Zionist entity called Israel, feeding them on a daily basis with weapons. And this is the reason why, to many South Africans, they look at it that both the parties and looking at the American political system is based on two major parties, which is the Republican parties and the Democrats. And both parties and both candidates have one thing in common: their unqualified support for Israel. And that is an overriding concern. All the other issues that they've been talking about and we've been watching throughout the build up to the elections, the campaigning, the pro-life, the questions surrounding abortion, immigration, all of that put together. But I think the biggest concern, and particularly amongst the pro-Palestinian lobby in South Africa, those that have been active in supporting the cause of Palestine, they have made it very, very clear that irrespective of whether it's Donald Trump or it had to be Kamala Harris, it still would not alleviate any of the pain, any of the suffering that the people of Palestine have been enduring. And you will recall, Al-Hajj, it was during the Trump presidency where he declared Jerusalem as the capital of Israel as well. It was through him and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, that pushed this agenda. We've seen even the response of Benjamin Netanyahu to the election of Donald Trump, to his victory, and gloating. And this is exactly what Benjamin Netanyahu wanted as well. So when one looks at it purely from a human rights perspective, looking at it from an economic perspective, Trump again is a transactional president. He will look at how this would benefit the United States of America first before anybody else. And this is the reason why Africa as a continent doesn't hold much hope on a Trump presidency either. And I think whether it would have been Kamala Harris or Donald Trump would mean absolutely very little for the African continent as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Brother Muhammad, your thoughts on what we've brought to the fore thus far, both in terms of what Bill Clinton had to say in that piece of video that we saw, as well as what our brother Inayet has shared about the attitude that is felt among those who are paying attention to the election here in this neck of the woods.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Pleasure hearing from you. Pleasure hearing the perspective of South Africa on the political / nationalist side of this border. We recognize that. I want you to take a look at that Clinton commentary again from a different perspective. First of all, at the bottom of it, he's standing in front of a podium that says Harris, which means he's speaking in the minds of those of us who are paying attention on behalf of Ms. Harris. So he's literally co-signing the genocide on behalf of Miss Harris. And her team never is correcting him or people like him who have either participated in this genocide, authored this genocide, or even attempted to condemn the genocide. That's the first point. The second point is the nature of the totality of his discussion. He really is telling you what has been the thought process of white supremacists throughout the world and is codified in the great case here in the United States, probably one of the most profound decisions that explains white supremacy in America. That's the Dred Scott decision. And that is that a white man has, a black man has no right that a white man is bound to respect. Now plug in Palestinian, plug in Lebanese, plug in African, plug in wherever it is that it says that they have no right that a white man is bound to respect. The right to the Palestinian people to live freely, separate and apart from, let's assume the truth of October 7th. Let's assume the truth of that, even though there are reports out there by people like Max Blumenthal, by El-Hajj, that debunk many of the myths and the falsehoods that have been put out there on what happened on October 7th. But let's assume the truth of it. The argument that he makes is that they have the right, and he's not talking just about Israel, he's talking about white supremacy, that they have the right to do whatever it is that they want to against whomever it is that they want to. He didn't once mention that they were killing Hamas. He's talking about you can kill anyone to get to the objective that you want. You can destroy anything that you want to get to the objective that you want. And if you define the objective as Hamas, then you get to define the parameters under which you can kill innocent civilians. And therein lies a very, very serious problem with what we saw, because you can transfer that over into what we saw here on Election Day. And that is the idea that white supremacists and white supremacy believes that it has a particular role to play that no one can question, especially as it relates to the issue of morality or the issue of law. And therein lies your ascension of Donald Trump and your ascension of people just like him. I would say this one thing about South Africa. If your people in South Africa are not aware of the election that's going on in the United States, they better get aware of it very quickly, because South Africa is the country that led the charge in the international courts of genocide against Israel. Israel is lockstep in white supremacy. Donald Trump is lockstep in white supremacy. They are all already upset with the idea that South Africa would not side with them, with white supremacists, over what Zimbabwe did in removing white supremacy thought process, narratives, and taking back the land. And because South Africa didn't rock with the white supremacists on this, they are now challenging Israel. You can literally expect that the next target of white supremacy in Africa will be South Africa.
What are your thoughts on that, brother Inayet? The observation that Brother Muhammad just made. What are your thoughts?
I think what Brother Muhammad mentions obviously is extremely relevant, looking at it from a South African perspective. And what you're saying, Brother Muhammad, is absolutely true. That if we are not aware of the United States, if we are not aware of the global political landscape, if we are not aware of the global dynamics, that are playing out in the global political landscape, particularly in the light of this genocide that has been unfolding and the South African position, we need to think again. South Africa in itself, when one looks at the elections that we've just had in South Africa, and we've seen this major shift, we've seen this change in government, we've seen a government of national unity. And many hold the view that this election was engineered from outside of South Africa. The outcomes of the elections, this government of national unity, looking at an ANC-led government with a majority, when you look at some of the opposition parties to the left of the ANC. But why did the ANC go into a government of national unity with parties to the right? And one just needs to look closely to the right. One needs to look at those parties. One needs to look at those backups. One needs to look at those funders. And when one looks at the American election as well, when you look at the funders of the Republicans, when you look at the funders of Kamala Harris and the Democrats as well, it all points to a certain direction. In fact, it points to the same direction that South Africa was set up to an extent for regime change. And South Africa being one of the powerhouses on the African continent as well. And this is what Brother Muhammad is saying. We need to be wary. We need to be watchful. We need to be very, very careful because the signs are there. It's the ominous. Looking at where South Africa stands, I mean, everybody talks about the global south. We're talking about the global north. But South Africa at this point in time is somewhere in between the two. Mm-hmm. We may have aligned ourselves to BRICS, to the global south, to the likes of Russia, to China as well. But to a large extent, we're largely dependent on the United States of America. When one just looks at the message that our president, President Cyril Ramaphosa, had conveyed to Donald Trump when he had announced his victory, President Ramaphosa spoke about mutual cooperation, mutual benefit between South Africa and the United States of America. And many are questioning this fact. What did he actually mean by mutual benefit? Where you've just come out of a BRICS summit that was held not very long ago. There were certain resolutions that were taken. And looking at South Africa and where we are at this point in time, we had people here within government, people like Dr. Naledi Pandor, who was at the forefront of the ICJ case. She is no longer in government. And the question we have is who is left in government, who is going to be as vociferous, who is going to be as vocal, and who is going to take the Palestinian struggle to heart. And this is where the concern is. And particularly with the mix that we see within the South African government of national unity, there are many, many pro-Zionists. There are those that have been spewing venom. There have been those who are members of cabinet who have been spewing hatred against the people of Palestine. And these are the warning signs that Brother Muhammad talks about, Al-Hajj.
And Sheikh, let me just jump in real quickly, just as an aside. If you look now, after the brilliant explanation that Sheikh just gave, if you look now at America, and now you wonder why Bill Clinton? Bill Clinton is the one who moved the Democratic Party from being a liberal left party to a center right party.
Yes, he did.
His commentary now helps you understand what was going on in the minds of the people who were orchestrating Kamala Harris's campaign that moved her away from the number one constituency that represents the Democratic Party, which is the Black community, and moved her to people like Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney and the anybody but Trump Republicans. She moved exactly to the right, exactly as Sheikh was saying is going on in South Africa. They are beginning to make coalitions with the people on the right, and the people on the right have an agenda. And that particular agenda is impacting internationally as well as what you just saw in the election impacting nationally.
There's a lot to think about. There's so much to think about when it comes to these elections that are being held in different parts of the globe, especially here in the United States, and what the short and long-term consequence of these elections will be. On the precedent-setting nature of this election that just took place here for the presidency, share with us, Brother Muhammad, your perspective on where things stand on the legal side, you know, in terms of these cases that the now returning president has been potentially facing. What's going to happen with these cases now from your perspective as a retired attorney?
And now as a prognosticator as well, right?
Yes.
All right. All right, listen. First of all, let me address something that you said earlier. You read the letter from CARE, congratulating the Muslims for turning out to vote. I can't disagree more heartily with that particular statement. And I'll tell you why. That conflict that we is, I'm going to get to your question about the law.
Okay.
What the conflict that was raging within the community was raging because of emotion, the emotion of the genocide. I get that. But when you start talking about how it is you're going to impact on American politics and you have no organization except that you are responding to emotion, your emotion does nothing. And it did nothing. It did nothing for the Muslim community. It did nothing for the move the needle forward. If every Muslim who said that they were going to come out or try to teach the Democrats a lesson and couldn't fathom voting for Trump had voted Green, the Green Party would have gotten 5% of the vote, and then you would have a third voice, another party, to be able to discuss problems or submit your problems or submit the discussion to, because then they would be required to, as a matter of law, to be a part and parcel of every and all debates because they would be getting federal funding. So without a plan, you're saying that you're going to do this, that, or the third, or evolving just your emotions in it, and then coming out and following the system the way it has always worked, did you no good. Now, as it relates to Donald Trump is charged in the federal court with racketeering in New York and with hiding the documents, etc., the documents case in Florida. They are both federal cases. The person who is prosecuting that is a special prosecutor named Jack Smith, who has been assigned to that case through the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office has a policy. It's not the law, but it is their policy to not ever prosecute a sitting president. So if they're not going to prosecute him between November 7th and January 16th or 15th or whenever he's sworn in, they're not going to prosecute him at all. That's just policy. Now let's talk legally. Legally, they have the right to prosecute him. I don't care if he's whatever. If he's committed a crime, he's entitled to fundamental due process, and the country is entitled to due process, because the victims of whatever happened to him, that is January 6th, the victims are potentially the United States of America. And that's what the Justice Department is sworn to uphold the law and to protect the United States of America, not to protect the president. But the person who would do the prosecution is hired and is appointed, is selected by the president. That's your constitutional prerogative that is given to the president. So what do you think is going to happen the very first day he's sworn in? If they continue to keep the federal cases open, Jack Smith will be fired, and those cases will be dismissed by the next attorney general who they appoint, and that will be a political move, not a justice move. And so that will help you again understand the potential, or at least the magnitude of the Dred Scott decision that says that a black man has no right that a white man is bound to respect. That is, the citizens that have no right that a white man is bound to respect. He can do whatever he wants to. This is what your immunity decision was about in the Supreme Court. Now the states are not beholden to the federal constitution for crimes committed in their state. They just have to make sure that their laws don't conflict with the United States Constitution, each state having its own constitution. But what do you think is going to happen in New York with this particular sentencing? Because in New York, he's already convicted. So they put off the sentencing. Why? Because if they put off the sentencing on him till after the election, that allows him the right to vote. If they had sentenced him prior to that, he would not have been able to vote in New York. But the law in New York allows you to vote as long as you are not under a sentence, a conviction, or in jail. All right? So then, now let's move that case along. He's probably going to get, with 34 convictions, all right, 34 guilty verdicts. Let me put it that way. And what people and pundits and all these cats that get on the line and tell you all this trash about him going to prison, don't count on it for a second. Why? Because out of the 34 counts, there's a concept called merger, meaning that if it arises out of each conviction, each count arises out of the same or similar conduct, then you treat it for one sentence that has the similar conduct. So for example, let's assume I was committed a robbery, all right, with a gun. Robbery with a gun comes with a 10-year prison sentence. I'm also convicted of possession of a weapon for an unlawful purpose. I don't get consecutive sentences for those other two counts. I get the one sentence for the robbery and the other one's merged into that. You understand? So if he got potentially probation for the major count and the other counts fall within that, he's going to get probation, and he may not even get probation, because what could you do with probation with the president of the United States? You can't place him under house arrest. You can't have him monitored with where he wears an ankle bracelet, which is what they do to every other felon convicted. I wasn't gonna say every other black felon, but you get my point. So you could expect New York to give him a admonishment, and in Atlanta, he's got a Republican governor, and he just won Georgia. He just won Georgia. Do you think for 1 minute that if he was convicted in Georgia of the racketeering charges there in the state of Georgia, that he won't get a pardon from Governor Kemp? He will get it in a heartbeat. So what's the sense in going through that process? So now, am I predicting that he's going to walk on everything? I've been predicting that since he got originally charged. And I was completely surprised and caught off guard when he was convicted in New York. Now, the civil cases, I expected him to go down on, because civil juries are preponderance of the evidence, and you only have to have, if you got 9 jurors, you only have to have 5 of them vote in your favor. All right. But in criminal cases, you have to have unanimous juries. And so therefore, no unanimous jury, not gonna be able to pick a unanimous jury. So they surprised me in New York with that particular conviction. But do I think he's going to go to jail? No. Do I think these cases are going to survive past January 1st? No. I think they all have legal loopholes and opportunities to be able to crush them all by virtue of his election to president of the United States.
So much for equal justice for all, and no one being against, above the law.
Yeah, now, just slip some blackface on him. I don't care if he's president of the United States or whatever. His behind is going to Rikers. Just slick a little bit of blackface on him. Just instead of the orange face, put a little bit of black makeup on him. He going to Rikers. Sitting right next to Puff Daddy, P. Diddy. That's the nature of what it is to be in America in the criminal justice system. And now it's been exposed in the political system, in case you all are missing.
One thing that has been that's a big question mark for me. I don't buy the 4%, 0.4%, the estimate, 0.4 to 0.9% of the electorate having voted for the Green Party. I truly believe it's a lot higher than that. Because when you think about what the Green Party got when Hillary Clinton was running, all right, when she ran, the Green Party got 1.5 million votes. That's what the estimate was, 1.5 million votes. And there was far more emotion and far more organizing that went into this pushback through the Green Party as a result of what has been taking place in Gaza. So, for the estimate to be around 600,000 this year, this election season, versus 1.5 million, 1.5 million, during that prior run that they had, which was their highest total to date, according to what the folks are saying who are keeping tabs. I just believe that there has been an intentional diminishing of what the actual numbers are in terms of how many people voted for the Green Party this year.
Agreed. I agree. I didn't see the groundswell or the debate from Hillary that they had here.
Not at all.
There was nothing like that. And when they appeared on, what's that stupid show, Breakfast Club, they literally blew the roof off the place. They were internet hot. And so for people to just disregard them to the point of they don't really matter, or third parties don't really matter, it boggles the mind. But I'll tell you something here. I'm gonna put my conspiracy hat on for you. Remember Donald Trump said that the election was stolen from him in 2020?
Yes.
You remember that? And that whole little thing that led to January 6th and all that foolishness, right?
Uh-huh.
And then he got almost the identical amount of votes that he had in this particular election, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Democrats didn't get anywhere near the amount of votes that they about 8 million short of what they got the last time. So somewhere out there are either 8 million people who decided to stay home, or, as Trump would say, somebody was tinkling with the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom line is American democracy, as they describe it, the American Republic, which is a facade for democracy, has from the inception never declared democracy. This is what your electoral college is about. They cannot trust the people of the United States to vote in the elected officials, and so therefore they created a mechanism, which was Antonin Scalia told you in 1988, that the American people do not vote for the president of the United States. And so therefore you have the right to assume that whenever there's something that's amiss there, that is consistent with the idea of the electoral college, which is again something that is a selected / white supremacist add-on to keep the people from having their voices heard in a way that impacts on the power elite in America. And the Green Party to me represents that, and the outcomes of the Green Party this election, considering the groundswell, or at least the publicity that they got that they didn't get in 2020 and 2016, suggests to me that you see afoot you see afoot to steal, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, there was a tremendous amount of passion. Yeah, brother.
Yes,
yes.
Yes, just a comment, and I think just following on from what Brother Muhammad is saying. As you mentioned, the outcome of this election may be historical, but the campaign in itself was unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
This was an in-your-face campaign in each and every way, compared to any other campaign, election campaign in the United States of America. We've seen it right across social media. It was in your face all the time. You get onto any social media platform, you get onto TikTok, every second or third video had something to do with the elections, whether it was Kamala Harris, whether it was Donald Trump. So this was a campaign that was fought, and since even the presidential debate that had taken place, and when one looks at this campaign, it had taken many dimensions, and to the extent that we've seen celebrities like we've never seen before on either side of the coin, supporting either candidate, whether we're talking about Elon Musk or Oprah Winfrey or any other celebrities. We've seen former presidents like President Barack Obama openly coming in support as well. We've seen Kamala Harris appearing on a comedy night show. Now, none of this was actually ever seen before, and this is the reason why I'm saying this was unprecedented. This was in your face. But again, surprisingly, with all the publicity, with all the coverage that this campaign was given, and the point that you are making right at the forefront for many an American, many a Muslim, many a marginalized community, whether we're talking about immigrants, you're talking about Latinos, you're talking about blacks, you're talking about the pro-Palestinian lobby as well. We thought that something would give, particularly in the light of the genocide. Every major city in the United States of America has seen literally hundreds of thousands of people actually taking to the streets against this genocide. We've seen it in almost major city. Yet, with the outcome, and when you talk of a number of around 600,000, it's unbelievable. It's very, very hard to believe, because we've seen it with many Muslim voters alone. I mean, in the last 30, 40 years, we know traditionally Muslims had a traditional support, or the Democrats had a traditional support base among certain sections of the Muslim population. But this has actually changed as well. And now Muslims were asking that question, who do we vote for? do we have an option? That third choice was there. And the clear issue here is both parties represented one thing. They represented the Zionist regime interests in more ways than one. And it was just very, very difficult for Muslims to actually align themselves with either party. And this is where these numbers, we got to start interrogating. We need to start questioning some of these numbers. And also just to question, where did the remaining vote go? We're talking about 2.5 million Muslims alone in the United States of America. Where did those 2.5 million votes go? And this again raises questions in terms of the election in itself, the electoral system, and how these numbers eventually had actually influenced the outcome of the Hajj.
MashaAllah, bro.
Yes, it does indeed raise a lot of questions. Again, the the emotion and the organizing. I myself, my position was that I wanted Harris and her vice presidential choice to be my opposition for the next 4 years. I wanted them to be my opposition because I just instinctively knew that if Trump was returned to the Oval Office, the consequence, not just for our brothers and sisters in occupied Palestine, but the consequence on many other critical issues beyond the genocide, would be at stake. It would be very high. And so I wanted her administration to be our opposition for the next 4 years. Yesterday, I heard a National Public Radio report, an NPR report, where Palestinians, and I found this to be very interesting, Palestinians on the West Bank were being interviewed. Their feelings about the outcome of the election. But, of course, by this time, the word was out that Trump had won the election. Each and every one of the Palestinians, male and females of different ages, all adults of different ages, who were questioned, shared their view that under Donald Trump, things would get worse. Not one expressed optimism that things might get better. I mean, this was their view from the West Bank and occupied Palestine, which is also, as we speak, going through an ethnic cleansing. And this is the reason why my position was as it was. I really wanted both parties. Actually, there were 3 independent parties that were running. I was very cognizant of 2. The one led by Dr. Jill Stein, the other led by Dr. Cornel West. If Biden had remained in the running, my position had been for months, no Biden, no Trump. We don't vote for either one of these individuals, and we focus as much attention as we can on the down ballot. Unfortunately, we end up with what we've ended up with. Trump has won the election, and unfortunately, the kind of attention that should have gone to the down ballot didn't go to the down ballot, and as a consequence, it has already been called that the Republicans will have control of the U.S. Senate. The House is still, the results are still being tallied. But if the Republicans end up with this cult figure now about to take the reins of the Oval Office again, if they end up with a with a Republican-dominated U.S. Congress, and I don't know what the situation is with the majority of state legislatures around the country, but if they end up with a dominant Republican-led House and Senate and state legislatures having a Republican majority, we are in for some even more difficult days ahead, I believe, in the United States. So what are your thoughts on that, Brother Muhammad?
I think we are in for some very difficult days in the United States of America, but I don't discount the idea that the so-called Black community in America has gone through some difficult days. The only problem I have is what I told you about the care letter.
Yeah.
The people who have been here for 300 years dealing with racism, white supremacy in America are not consulted, especially the Muslims who are so-called Blacks.
Yeah.
Are not consulted by other communities on how to deal with America, especially politically or socially, because the people who are in Dearborn and who are pro-Palestinian are emotionally connected to that and don't want to give the leadership over or to have the discussion with the community that has been here and has been indigenous to the land, who understands white supremacy here in America better than anybody in the world understands it. And nobody understands white supremacy better than Jamil Abdullah El-Amin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Imam Siraj. These are cats who fought that battle. Warthin, Haji Sham Jabber. These are guys who fought that battle, who left us blueprints on how to deal with the racism and the white supremacy here in America. When people come over here by virtue of the struggle, by virtue of the 1965 Immigration Act, and they come in with an Islam and teachings of Islam that believes that, as the Sheikh indicated about South Africa, that you can have mutual cooperation with people and don't understand who the people are, that they are going to always vote race first. They don't care about their taxes. They don't care about their health care. They don't care about any of that stuff as long as you have that white male presence as the dominant force in America, because and Trump being the guy who's just like the guy on their couch. That's where they vote. That's where they rest their heart at. But we as a community, listening to the leadership that won't organize, because that means they have to organize with the Black community, Muslims who are Black, come into it as if they are Muslims, and therefore they're being seen as different or at least acceptable in America. You are not acceptable in America. Trust that. But all you need to do is ask your Muslim brother who has been here for 300 years, that they see you differently, and you only fit into America by virtue of where it is that you fit into the hierarchy that keeps white supremacy on top, and you find a space there you can fit in somewhere in the middle. And most Muslims, forgive me, a lot of Muslims and a lot of Latinos and a lot of other ethnic groups and a lot of Africans, they're concerned about two things. One, the emotion of the moment, and two, just as long as I ain't treated like them niggas.
Well, certainly, and I think from what you are saying, Brother Muhammad, and when we're talking about white supremacy, and the United States has actually caught up with the election of Donald Trump. And we've seen this evolving over a period of time throughout Europe. And what America is experiencing right now is what Europe has been undergoing for a very, very long time. And we've seen these right-wing white supremacist governments mushrooming throughout entire Europe for a very, very long time. We've even seen it in Brazil at some point in time. And even if one looks at the United Kingdom, who's just come out of an election that has been won by a supposedly left-wing party, the Labour Party. And when one looks at the race riots that had taken place in the United Kingdom on its own, I mean, that alone was horrific. It may have been sparked by something claimed to be Islamophobic, but at the end of the day, it has been again, and it turned out to be an anti-immigrant white supremacist riot, which is exactly what Donald Trump has been talking about, which is what exactly the agenda of Donald Trump has been again. And it will still continue. The question is, and perhaps El-Hajj, you can shed just some light in terms of should Donald Trump carry out his threat that he's made during his election campaign, what could the likely consequences be?
I mean, the
Remember-
consequences will be dire. Go ahead, Brother Muhammad.
You remember 1954? Do you remember
Yes.
1954?
Yes,
Do you remember the mass deportations there? See, I'm talking about something in my lifetime. I might have been a baby, but 1954 is seared in my mind because I have some Mexican family. All right? So it's seared in my mind. But the mentality of the Mexican, after they deported over 1.5 million, and according to records, 60% of them were citizens. After they deport them, 10 years later, the Mexicans who are in the country are saying, when they talk about Mexicans being criminals, etc., this is only in the 60s, from 54 to 65, right? So in 65, the Mexicans who are in the country are saying, oh my God, don't let any more Mexicans in because they make us look bad. And that's exactly what the elite blacks say about street blacks. They make us look bad. And so now if you recognize that as being the mentality, and you recognize that as being something that has been already done in history, it's done in 37, it was done in 37, and I think it was done in 54, mass deportation, you can expect mass deportation. All right? And regardless of what the law says about it. The other thing is you got a guy who's a convicted felon and has like 5 criminal cases against him. Do you think he really cares about what the law is? I mean, how many of you really think that he's going to abide by the law? He's got twice impeached by not abiding by the law. He has 2 federal indictments by not abiding by the law. He doesn't care about the law. So you pick a particular instance. Rumor is that he spoke to Netanyahu and said he wants the bombing to stop before he gets sworn in. The people think that that's an overture toward stop it. Why isn't it an overture toward increase it and wipe them out, get them off the face of the earth before I have to put my hands on it? See, if you're thinking like he thinks, that's what he's asking Netanyahu to do. Get rid of them before I have to get involved. That's what's going on. So expect an escalation between November and January of the bombings in Lebanon, of whatever else is going on. Project 2025. Expect him to eliminate the administrative state. Why? Because it eliminates the Department of Education. In order for you to get rid of Brown versus Board, right? Separate but equal being the law of the land. Going back to that, in order to go back to that, you have to get rid of the Department of Education and then turn your public schools into charter schools where people can pay and control their own destiny because it's now not controlled by the government, not controlled by federal law, etc. EEOC, your rights to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Project 2025 will eliminate these administrative agencies that would allow people to say, hey, my rights are being violated on my job. If you don't have that agency, where are you going to go? Because private lawsuits are not going to get it cut. The government is the one who brings those lawsuits or gives you the right to sue. But you're not winning any of those private lawsuits. All you got to do is just look at qualified immunity and black people suing and getting their cases tossed out. This is the promise of Donald Trump, and this is what you can expect almost immediately when he takes the witness stand as being president of the United States. But you have organizations like CARE. I hope you're armed and ready for this particular battle. You have organizations like the NAACP. I hope you're armed and ready for this particular battle because you just showed me that you were not armed and ready for this particular election because you would have told everybody in Mississippi, where you know is a red state, you know it's going to go red. Why are you, as a black person, voting for Kamala Harris when you can vote for a Green Party and turn the country upside down by having 3 parties as opposed to 2 competing parties, and they both same 2 different sides of the same coin? You would have organized around that to say we can't win in Mississippi, we can't win in Alabama, we can't win in South Dakota. All these places that are rebel states, we can't win in, but we can take that vote because the popular vote does not elect the president. We can take that popular vote and elect a whole new party. But that's thinking past the box. And I didn't see that in this election. And I'm hoping that I don't see it come the next year when they be starting mass deportations and mass incarceration, reinstitution of mass incarceration.
Okay, but you know that there wouldn't have been any real possibility of any independent party winning.
That's not the point.
You're talking about being able to achieve that 5%, right? That's what you're talking about.
There you go. Think about what Claude Anderson told you back in 1992, Powernomics. The goal is you find something you can unify around.
Yeah.
And then that's the way, because the goal is power. The goal isn't winning the presidency. When you can gain and you can say, hey, we got a third party in here now. Almost every country around the world has more than one party, except the United States of America. They only have two, and they always competing for limited spots. We call them, what are they called? Battleground states. They only compete for those. We already know Alabama is going red. So in order for us to change the system, we go out of that. We take all those people who are red who would have voted for Kamala, my apologies, because we know 60% of those white Americans are going to vote and carry that red state and say, no, that popular vote is not going to matter. We already saw that with Hillary Clinton. It's not going to matter. So take that popular vote somewhere else strategically, and let's create another party so that we have more voices into it, so that we have something that closely resembles a Democratic Party.
I got you, and I agree, brother. I agree. I mean, that kind of strategy is what should have gone into the election, and there also should have been, and this is what I was calling for months ago, but unfortunately, I guess that call was falling on deaf ears, that there should be emphasis placed on as equal emphasis. My argument was that there needed to be equal emphasis placed on the down ballot. And that didn't happen. And as a result, we know, again, the U.S. Senate has gone over to the red side. It is now controlled by the Republican Party, which is Trump's party. And there is a very good possibility. I hope that doesn't play out this way, but there's a very good possibility that the Democratic, that the House side would also end up being Republican dominated. And if that ends up being the case, it will magnify the kind of pressure, people in this country across the board are going to be under in the years ahead. With that being said, let's bring this to a close with some closing thoughts. Let's begin with you, Brother Inayet. What are your closing thoughts on this topic of ours for today?
Well, El-Hajj Mauri, this clearly has been a learning curve, and I think there's a lot of food for thought in what Brother Muhammad had to say. Obviously, we need to go back to the drawing board. At this point in time, the two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, are not the be-all and the end-all of American politics. Clearly, at grassroots level, there are other options, and it's time to go back to the drawing board for Muslims to rethink where we are or where the Muslim community is in the United States, in the political landscape. And again, we know that the Muslim vote in America was not at all created equal. It needed to actually break the two-party monopoly by helping the third party, by getting that 5%, and that would have helped. But again, there need to be checks and balances. Somebody like Donald Trump, we know he's a loose cannon. We're not too sure how much of a looser cannon he's going to be now that he's going to be serving his second term of office as well. So he needs to be checked as well. But also at the same time, as Muslims in America, they need to make a statement that the one vote no one can ignore is the Muslim vote. At the same time, sending a very, very strong message to the Democrats that genocide Democrats have not earned the Muslim vote. And we know, although Donald Trump had made some gains with Muslims as well, but we know that he is surrounded, and we've seen it also in the last week before the elections. Some of the worst racists had actually come to the fore. Some of the worst bigots have actually come to the fore. And this is the reality. This is the reality on the ground. And this is the reason why I say is we need to go back to the drawing board. Just looking at it from an international perspective and looking at it from a foreign policy perspective, Palestinians obviously are not convinced. They are not even happy whether it would have been Trump or Kamala Harris. And looking at Donald Trump and his position on the Middle East, I mentioned earlier on Donald Trump being a transactional president, and he will only do what will be of benefit to himself, to the United States of America. And this is the type of president that he is. And if you will recall, during his first term, he pushed towards a remake, the reshaping of the Middle East, trying to reconcile Saudi Arabia and Israel as well. And again, all eyes will be on Donald Trump in terms of how he's going to handle what is taking place between Israel in Gaza and also Hezbollah in Lebanon, what his position is going to be with regard to Iran. We know it has been held by Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that his election win was history's greatest comeback. So all of this actually put together is a lot of food for thought, and we need to think about these things both from the U.S. looking at it from an internal perspective, the internal dynamics, his promise to make America great again, but also in terms of foreign policy and how he sees the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm. I thank you for that, brother. The only thing I would say before we go to Brother Muhammad with his final thought is I really appreciate everything you said. But there's this one point that I think needs that can use some clarification, and that is that Donald Trump will, you believe that he will do what is best, what he considers to be in the interest of America. My view is that Donald Trump will do what he feels is best, first and foremost, for his own personal interests and those like him, and also by extension for the empire, not for the America. There's the former Senator J. William Fulbright, for whom the Fulbright Scholarship is named. He chaired the one of the most powerful committees in the U.S. Senate longer than any other senator up to that time, up until the time that he retired and a few years later passed away. And that is the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He, from that very powerful perch, was able to really assess America holistically, so to speak. And he wrote a very insightful book that, when I've lectured on the two Americas, I've often referenced this book of his, The Arrogance of Power. Are you familiar with that, Brother Muhammad?
Yes.
The Arrogance of Power. Mm-hmm. All right. That is a book that I consider to be a must read, especially now. Even now, it is a must read. The Arrogance of Power by J. William Fulbright. He describes in The Arrogance of Power two Americas. And the reality is that there has always been two Americas, going all the way back from the beginnings of this country. There have always been two Americas, and the most dominant America of the two has always been the one that is not the America of the free, not the America of the home, not the America of the brave, not the America that symbolizes liberty and justice for all. That we have seen different points in time when that more beautiful America has been able to show itself, but it has never been able to fully blossom. It has never been able to fully blossom. And so, when you say Donald Trump will do what is in the best interest of America, it's not the America the beautiful. It's not the America of liberty and justice for all. He will do what he considers to be best for the America that he believes represents his and his comrades' interests, and that is the America that symbolizes empire by any means necessary. That's my humble view. Brother Muhammad, your final thought.
Just to follow up on that, Sheikh Wadee, thank you so much for your commentary. I learned so much, and it connects a lot of dots for me. It connects the dots of Elon Musk, Sachs, all these cats who come from out of South Africa who are trying to impose a South African apartheid regime here in America. People forget that those are the people who are backing this cat, Donald Trump. Yeah. But that's who the people, these are the billionaires who came out of South Africa after exploiting Black people in South Africa for hundreds of years and finally got kicked out, but they came to America. When the Nazis got thrown out, the Germans came where? They came to America. That rally that you saw in Madison Square Garden was just a replay of the Nazi rally that was in 1939. They come here. Why do they come here? This is to Brother Saalakhan, with all due respect to him, this is to his point. Because the America that we are talking about is the America of Dr. King, the dream America, the one where they say be true to what you say on paper. Mm-hmm. They never believed what they put on paper. This is why they had the constitutional conventions. They had to go back behind it and create an electoral college, because they never believed in a democracy where it's one man, one vote. The vote counted, you voted for the person. No, they never believed about that. And they still don't believe in that. And therein lies the problem with the vote and people of color voting without having multiple voices in it to be able to shape the legislation and to shape what's going on in America. Without other voices other than the Democrats and the Republicans, just like in South Africa, where they're moving, all of them are moving to the right. If the two political parties move right of center, then where's the voice of the vast majority of the people going to be heard at? When they talk about mutual cooperation between South Africa and the United States, and they both are on the right-hand side, what do you think that cooperation means for the people who are on the left-hand side? You have to go. You can get deported, you can get incarcerated, you can get locked up, you can get denied loans, you can get denied jobs, etc., etc., etc. You can go on down the road. In the absence of other alternatives in America, you waste your vote every time you step out there and you are unorganized and you do not understand the political landscape. You are voting on emotion or you are voting on personality, and you are bound to lose.
Alhamdulillah. I want to thank both of you brothers. We had a second video, but we're inshallah ta'ala, we're going to save that one for Sunday. I want to thank both of you. Brother Inayet, this is your first time, brother, joining your brother Saalakhan on his broadcast. Inshallah ta'ala, it will not be the last. I really appreciated having you with me, brother. I really appreciated it. And, the insights that you were able to bring to this conversation on what is being, spoken about, and what the thought is on the in South Africa concerning this tumultuous political space that we find ourselves in right now here in the United States of America. And Brother Muhammad, as always, brother, I really appreciate the insights that you bring to the table of discussion as well.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless your night, Brother Inayet, with a peaceful night's rest and a happy morning's rise. And Brother Muhammad, may Allah ta'ala bless the rest of your day. And
Ameen.
That we close out. We close out as we normally do with Surah Al-Asr. Inshallah ta'ala. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wal Asr. Innal insana lafi kusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amalu salihat wa tawassaw bil haqq wa tawassaw bis sabr, which means in the translation of the meaning, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, by the token of time through the ages, surely humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum.